Welcome to our next version of Talking Talent. Today, really happy to have two wonderful panelists with us discussing the impact that VC internal talent teams have and how they can best guide and support their portfolios. So we're going to have a really interesting conversation, and we'll guide you through the agenda for the rest of today. So a little bit on who I am, firstly. So I am your host for today. My name is Georgia, another Brit in Berlin. I've been here for a few years now, been in the startup scene for around 4 years, and I am the head of executive search at Accelerate. Been in the company for over 4 years now, so I've seen many different evolutions of it, but still wake up loving my job every day, which is great. A little on Accelerate. A few of you will know who we are, but a few of you won't. So we are an end-to-end recruiting services partnering with startups and scale-ups in the tech ecosystem. A lot of our clients are here in Europe, but we also work with clients over in the States as well. We have 3 different service lines tackling all your different hiring challenges. So the first one is our embedded hiring function, whereby a talent partner will go internally to your company and plug themselves in for a period around 6 to 12 months and work on an array of roles, as well as a lot of strategic and operational topics. We then have the executive search and leadership hiring function, which I head up. We partner again with startups and scale-ups in the fields of technology, operations, and go-to-market roles. If you need to hear anything about that later, please write me directly. And our third and final service line is Connect. So if you have those very hard to fill niche roles where you need to bump up that top of the funnel candidates, we will send you ready to interview candidates. And who are Talking Talent and what do we do? So Talking Talent has been around for a few years now. Started from kind of the observations that we've made on the market of wanting to discuss hiring and all its parameters and all its challenges. So we brought together an event series and a Slack community to tackle those challenges. Gabby will post a link in the chat actually, where you can sign up to the Slack community. Feel free to introduce yourself, bring your questions, bring your comments. No comments are too small, and we look forward to seeing you there. So without further ado, today's agenda. So we will start off with a fun icebreaker, so you'll get to know who's in the audience as well as your panelists. We will then do the round of introductions where you'll meet Catherine and Polly today and learn about who they are and what they're doing at the moment. We will then go into the Q&A, the panel, discussions, where we have around 5 questions. They will provide their insights and answers, and then we will do a Q&A. So feel free at any point to drop your questions and comments into the chat, and we'll pick them up at the end of the conversation. So over to the icebreaker. So the question is, if you had a time machine and could go back in time to invest in a startup, which would it be and why? So have a little think and answer in the chat, and also provide your LinkedIn profile for networking purposes. We'll have a couple of moments to do that. And Polly and Catherine, you've already been thinking about this, right? We did this earlier, so I'd love to kick off with your answers. Catherine, over to you. What would you say?
The one that immediately springs to mind is Stripe. They're just so all-encompassing. I think it's a company that when you look at how young the guys were founding that, on the face of it, you go, is this going to be a huge outlier? And to look at what they've turned that business into, it's incredible, and really huge admiration for both.
Yeah. Absolutely. Amazing branding as well. They're always the pinnacle, I think, of who we've admired as companies. I know our CEO thought that as well. Polly, what about you?
Well, I'm not going to make as much money as Catherine, but I'm a huge fan of Calm. I believe in that app a lot. It's something I use daily. People always, when we ask this question in the fund, everyone always says Spotify, and I say Calm. So that's my kind of usage thing. I guess the other one is that because actually one of them is a client, has been a client of mine, but I'm a big user of circular fashion apps. So Vestiaire, Vinted, who are in our portfolio, but also Depop have been a client. I think those are amazing.
Yeah.
future of something more sustainable in an area that I'm passionate about, fashion. So
yeah, no, I agree. No, I have to actually get rid of those apps, Polly, because I spend too much on Vista and Depop and all of this. But Vinted as well is a classic for the children's stuff, you know, end up just scrolling and just buying everything on there. But agreed. So what have we got in here? So a couple of people have said Airbnb, good one. Yeah, I think we all use those. Calm as well. Yeah, great app. Nice. I think from my side, always really loved health tech, and particularly with a focus on female health tech. In fact, Clue, one of our clients, have recently opened up to invited people to invest. So I've actually become an investor in Clue now, which I'm very happy about. Nice. Monzo as well. Great.
See, Yanni's mentioned Zoom, which was the same discussion I think we were having.
We had this earlier, right?
In pre-pandemic, you know, you've done very well for yourself.
Nice. New bank. Okay, so quite a new neo-banking things. Calm. Yes, we all need a bit more calm in our lives. Plan A. Awesome. Cool. Okay, so we'll move on now to the introductions from both of your sides. So I think what would be really nice is to hear, you know, who you are, what's your story, and then just to follow on from that, a little bit more about the VCs that you work for, you know, the portfolio companies and kind of the investment stages. So Polly, I'll kick off with you.
Okay, so I'm the talent operating partner at EQT Ventures. My background, I started my career in marketing and branding before moving into people. I think that marketing branding is really adjacent to what you're trying to achieve when you deliver a fully geared people strategy. So that's always been something I leverage. I worked in entrepreneurial organizations, speed, change, that's what I love. Can't stay away from it, sucker for punishment, I don't know why. Up to a big people role, which was 25 markets, 4,500 people. Actually, not really my bag, because I just said I love entrepreneurial businesses, but what was amazing about that was the market stretch, you know, which still I use today, because the humility you learn from launching and working in different markets, super important. Then I set up a consultancy which focused on my mission, which is really, I don't believe that early stage businesses, because they lack either the experience or think they lack the finances, invest early enough in their people infrastructure. And that was the problem I was continually hired to solve. I was always inheriting HR debt, and then you're playing catch up. And so the key, in my opinion, to building inclusive and strong cultures starts super early. And that's what I think, you know, what I was on the mission and was productizing to solve. Through that mission, I met first Balderton and then EQT Ventures. I became an advisor, and then when we raised V3 earlier last year, which is a billion euro plus fund, which is one of largest Europe's largest early stage funds, then they asked me to come in-house. But the mission really remains the same, because that's what early stage companies really need. So yeah. Within EQT, I act as an internal consultant with Chloe, who's in my team too. And we are really focused on identifying what the critical interventions are on your people operating system or within talent that really enable you to scale a business. And that means putting in place some of the hardcore things, kind of like people strategy, like employee journey, like people ops and transparent comp, early stage.
Great. Thanks, Polly. Catherine, over to you.
Oh, how do I follow that? I feel like probably the same.
It was a great intro. No pressure.
So I'm Catherine. I'm the talent director at Omers Ventures. So I only joined Omers this year, actually. So I can give a bit of perspective on what I've learned. But for those who don't know Omers, we are an early stage tech investor. We've got a global investment team, mainly made up of former operators like myself, who've worked in startups before joining the VC side. And our returns actually fuel the pensions of more than, I think now, 500,000 public sector workers in Ontario. So firefighters, librarians, paramedics, you know, so it's kind of really nice to work for a fund where you feel there's that real world impact, you know, at the end of this, you're actually helping very hardworking actual people, which was a really big thing for me in making that shift from a startup world into VC. So I've always worked with very mission driven companies. I was at Wise from kind of very early days through to you know, the thousands of people, and seeing that growth journey was really exciting. And I've always kind of worked with forward-thinking tech companies who have some kind of people transformation challenge, whether that is, how do you really rapidly scale headcount? How do you internationalize? How do you harmonize cultures post M&A? How do you shift to fully remote, you know, working? And you know, I've always looked at the people experience as a product and something you need to thoughtfully design and take the same care with as you would building a product for your customers, and you know, really see employees as internal customers of your people experience product. And so it's been actually an incredible journey to kind of move into a VC role where you can scale the impact that you have, and rather than converting one company to that line of thinking and start to build those things, you can actually shift the market and help multiple companies think about their people strategy in a different way, and kind of move the entire sector at once. So Polly, I think you and I should maybe grab a coffee after this. I feel like there's a lot of similarities.
Definitely. Thank you, Catherine. And just to kind of zoom in, I guess, a little bit more into the ventures and what they're doing, maybe Polly, you can kind of give us a bit more insight as to, you know, who EQT are, who they serve, and kind of what we're talking in terms of scalable funds.
Of course. So we are headquartered in Stockholm. We're actually the venture branch of EQT Partners, which is a very large private equity fund. Within Ventures, as I just mentioned, we're on Ventures 3. We are generalist early stage investor with currently 120 portfolio companies across Europe and in the Bay Area, all of whom I service, kind of core part of my role. EQT is just very similar to Catherine. We're all operators, so everybody has been there, done it themselves. I guess what has really what convinced me to join, and what still makes me very proud about us as a fund, is the absolute empathy and concern for being relevant and helping founders, which is why we obviously have operating support. I think that more or less is, as I said, we raised V3 earlier this year, so we are currently deploying that into some really exciting businesses, actually a lot more impact investing and a lot more hardware, which is, you know, obviously a general VC kind of trend. You might have seen some of the press around the exploration company that we just invested in, which is a French space company. I just went to the space the JFK Space Center in Florida over Easter. Amazing. So I am now, you know, fully focused on this new space race. So that's amongst the things. And of course,
nice. Great. So we'll see you in Mars. You'll be calling from Mars next time, Polly, right? Nice. What about you, Catherine? A little bit more on OMAs.
Sure. So I think a lot of people, I guess, in Europe maybe are less familiar with OMAs. It's very well known in North America, and particularly Canada, funnily enough, being a Canadian pension fund. But we actually have investments globally, from Singapore, you know, to London, North America. I think some of the ones folks might recognize are kind of DuckDuckGo, the privacy-led internet browser company, early investors in Shopify, Hootsuite, Hopper, Flagstone, Clearcover, kind of a bunch spanning everything from health tech, insurance tech, fintech. We are a generalist fund, but I do definitely have some industry experts that have their own preferences and kind of verticals that they might pursue. But yeah, so similarly to Polly, I think it's really about how we can bring and kind of leverage that experience, the collective expertise we have from a global team who have seen everything from, you know, scaling Slack or scaling Uber to help companies at that right point in time, back, you know, when they're a Series A and get the right foundations in place, and warn them of what is coming up from the experience that we have.
Great, thank you so much. So yeah, thank you both for those very colourful introductions. Happy to move on to the questions now. So the first question, I think this is relevant for all of us working with lots of different clients. As someone who works with various portfolios, what do you think is the biggest challenge that startups face when it comes to hiring? So Catherine, we can start with you.
Biggest challenge. I think the things I commonly see, there's a few pitfalls. I think those is companies who overhire slightly, so they can get excited by a big name on a CV and think that that's synonymous with this person is going to, you know, bring the experience, the collective knowledge of Amazon or Google into their company, but they're not really looking at what is it they need right now, and do they have infrastructure in place for that person to do their best work, or is transitioning from, you know, a 100,000 person company to a 10-person company actually not going to be the right match, and maybe they need someone who's done the 0 to 1 rather than where they're going to be several years time. So I think for hiring too far ahead, particularly in leadership roles, where they end up with leaders who aren't willing to be hands-on and get their hands dirty and really be a little bit more flexible. And I think the other area that can be a bit problematic is, you know, a lack of employer brand for very small kind of early stage companies, or, you know, being unable to kind of get that cut through means that they end up relying very heavily on outbound or referrals, which can bring with it its own biases, its own kind of homogeneity within the company. And because they may not have recruitment teams dedicated at this point in time, that's then very time intensive on founders or leadership teams who have other things to do. So either recruiting falls down the priority list, or they don't know how to really kind of pitch to candidates, and they're not giving it the time and giving the candidate experience they might need to, because it's just one of 20 things they're doing. Or those interviewers aren't trained, so you end up with a dilution in your talent density in the organization, because you end up with, you know, inexperienced people who maybe haven't interviewed before, and nobody is making hiring their sole responsibility. It's just a little bit of everyone's responsibility, and therefore that lack of accountability, I think, sometimes can hurt companies at an early stage. I'd say those are some of the main ones. Polly?
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? I think founders, I can also relate to this, sometimes don't understand that recruiting is a full-time job, right? And, you know, we have this with them, kind of just mapping out at the beginning how much time they have to invest in hiring leaders or a role, and they're shocked, you know, at what that does take. So totally understand. What about you, Polly?
Well, I had exactly the same things recorded as Catherine, so we're pattern matching here. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, first of all, early stage founders are always looking for the unicorn. In effect, that, you know, I want to hire a VP Eng. Okay, yeah, I want a creative strategist and a team leader in one individual. Those are not one individual. Those are two separate individuals, separate archetypes. And I guess my job and focus is about expediting the learning process to get us to understand the trade-offs between those two. So that happens again and again, and we're really trying to focus down on that. The other one, again, Catherine has mentioned, but, you know, I need a CPO. I want to hire the CPO at Spotify to my Series A company of 10 to 15 people, without thinking about who the next potential CPO is. So it's really about, you know, over-indexing on experience versus skills and strengths when hiring. But of course, that latter piece is much more difficult to assess. You know, we feel comfortable when we just see the names on the CV and the big brands, and therefore that means that we swim in a smaller pool. I worry about that too, just because we know that our talent pool in startups isn't very diverse. So if we just pattern match to success, we're going to end up with more white male candidates, and that's something obviously we really need to disintermediate. So those are kind of, and then of course you get to, well, you know, I need to hire more women into these senior roles, but you haven't done, or more diverse, less represented candidates, and you haven't kind of done the groundwork to put that in place. The other thing I think that's more kind of the moment is the attraction piece. So, you know, we've lived in an era where startups have offered a really compelling career opportunity to everyone who joined. The real offer was, look, you know, this business is going to grow super quickly, and with that, you're going to accelerate your career in a way you can't in a more traditional business. We're easing slightly and we're entering a new era. So I think that the other point now is to think for any founding team to think about, right, what makes us really attractive, and some things around, you know, from the get-go, it's not maybe about a family anymore. It is about us being here as co-workers who work as a team. What does that mean for you? What are we being transparent about in terms of your compensation and your career opportunity? And what is our strategy? Because people are a little worried about joining a startup. So what's the strategy for growth, and how is your role going to play a part of it? It's still a super compelling place, of course. But those are the things that I think, if we rest on the growth area laurels and play to the old playbook too much, we're going to be doing ourselves a disservice.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I've noticed that as well, kind of working with clients at the moment, that we're having to, I guess, dive deeper at earlier stage into the values. And quite often they don't even have the values mapped out. So then, it's our role to ask them, actually, what are the behaviors that you want to see, or that, are the non-negotiables, and then really weaving this now into the interview process and the overall kind of storytelling piece as well, because that's what we're going to get people with now. Because actually a lot of the salaries are going down. We're seeing people that they're not blown away by this anymore. So it's all of these kind of intersections together, right? But cool. Let's move on to the next. Oh, sorry, Catherine.
I was just going to emphasize something that Polly mentioned. I think is really important. The point around everyone's trying to hire from the same big FANG companies, right? Everyone's from Spotify or someone who's worked at that kind of recognizable brand names.
Yeah.
And I think you see this throughout the HR spectrum. You see it in learning development and other areas as well, where people kind of just look to what bigger companies have done that was innovative, and they go, okay, we want to be innovative as well, so we're going to copy what that other company have done, right? Which is not innovative, right? Those companies have looked into what is the problem that we are trying to tackle, and how can we best solve that in the way that reflects us, our values, our ways of working, our strategy, and where we're going. And you see this with hiring, that people see hiring as the solution to a lot of their problems, and think, if I just hire someone who's seen this before, they'll know what to do, and they will be the magic answer, because they've got this brand name. And actually I think the companies that will be very attractive are the ones who figure out how to develop their own talent, that next generation that become known as the next brand name people want on their CVs. Because they'll go, oh, if you worked at company X, Y, and Z, we know they did do really different or really innovative and interesting things. And so I think companies need to be a little bit less afraid to lead, and instead of just hiring in, I think a lot of companies could focus a little bit more on developing the talent that they have and developing new ideas.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Okay, let's move on to the next one. So with AI increasingly dominating technical expertise, how are you helping your portfolio companies prepare for the impact of AI from a talent perspective? So an enormous topic. I think we need a separate event to cover everything here, but I would love to hear your initial thoughts, Polly.
Okay, so I mean, it relates to some other things that I'll come to touch on later, kind of around our talent toolkit that we've launched. But we have, where our focus lies in talent, one of the interesting things about VC is that, of course, everyone expects you to know people, and a VC exists to know people. It's not just what the talent partners do, it's what the entire fund does, is be out there, recognize great talent, and nurture, and hopefully invest, of course, and bring people into the portfolio. For me, the critical intervention that we focus on is around sourcing. This is something that I don't think a lot of portfolio companies have the resources to do in-house again, and it is something we've already enabled through AI. We have a platform, Motherbrain, which is our core AI platform within the fund, which we use to source deals, but we also have increasingly using that to upweight our sourcing capabilities for our fund. So that's one proprietary area where AI has been our focus. Of course, we also have investments into great HR tech, such as Sana Labs, who are AI-enabled L&D platform, and we run a lot of our webinars and things through Sana Labs. But I guess critically, as you pointed out, this is an enormous church, and one of our focuses has really just been to say, where is the need? Where is the critical need for the people that we're trying to service? And how do we facilitate that through AI? Of course, there's some super exciting things coming up through EF, like Juicebox, which could revolutionize this sourcing capability that I'm talking about. I'm not quite sure how that works with data protection and everything else, but let's with the AI first. So I think, the point being, yes, of course, this changes everything. Separate to this, again, I'll come on to that, but we have a people community, and within that community, we talk a lot. I think there's going to be revolutions around HRIS and stuff and ATSs for this community. But if I'm just focused on how I service founders in the role of talent, the sourcing toolkit capability is something we focus on and leverage to help find great people.
And then what's kind of your advice to, interconnect, I guess, someone that's working with you in talent infrastructure and these AI tools? Because I think everyone is, let's say, a little worried and apprehensive about their future as recruiters, because a lot of these AI tools, as you said, are fantastic. And I think I'm quite curious about the interconnectedness and, the interaction between both. So what is your advice to a recruiter, a sourcer, or any level to interact with these tools?
So the first thing I would do, rather than be prescriptive, I think if a team isn't sitting down together, a talent team isn't sitting down together already thinking about how AI is going to change their roles, they really need to do that on an away day as an absolute matter of priority. And then, like, around tools, of course, that's then the role is to go out to explore. But we ran an internal AI session recently. And, the fact of the matter is AI is not going to take your job, but somebody who is great with AI probably will. And that for me is the key message at this stage. Rather than jumping on a bandwagon, I think the phase that talent people should get themselves into is first recognition, internal analysis, and then research. And that's where I'd go now.
Yeah. And how often are you using these tools in your day-to-day life now, Polly?
Well, I mean, ChatGPT, but how did I write this?
Yeah, exactly. Is it really me here now?
Yeah, we are also, we've done exactly what I just described to you. We've done analysis. We use Motherbrain on a daily basis. That's the tool that underpins what we do within the fund. So, and then outside of that, we are exploring. We haven't implemented. We don't implement tools into our core functionality. We act as recommenders. We bring HR tech founders into our talent community and help them talk with the product users and develop products. So that's how we do that.
Yeah, amazing, great. Over to you, Catherine. How are you supporting your portfolio companies with this topic?
Sure, I can add that Polly hasn't already covered, and to avoid this becoming a very boring talk of us, routing the same things back and take a slightly different angle on it. So, rather than covering maybe the hiring side, I think, what's been interesting is, people seeing this as productivity enhancing and enabling. Rather than, to your point, Polly, being scared of this and seeing it as people replacements. It's really about helping companies and the people within those teams figure out what is something that only a human is going to be able to really add value to. So things that are judgment calls. So things like a hiring decision. AI might be able to give you more visibility of a wider pool of candidates. But fundamentally, how you interview, how you figure out what you're looking for, that final call, someone needs to be accountable for that. There's accountability. There needs to be a person involved who is trained, and they're supported and enabled by these tools. So I think really it's helping companies to come up with their own internal guidelines about how they use these tools to their best effect, to make sure there's a lot of internal comms to settle any nerves where people might be worried they're being replaced. You need to see this as a very emotive topic for a lot of people and be very empathetic and not just say, right, here's some guidelines, here's some links to tools you can and can't use. These have been blacklisted off of, the company VPN or whatever it might be. But to make sure you're actually upskilling people in how to use those, internal knowledge sharing sessions, helping people understand how to write prompts well, making sure that you celebrate when those things are done. And, are you looking at this all the way through your employee life cycle? So if you're measuring performance, have your expectations shifted on what a top performer looks like? If you're now expecting them to use ChatGPT is part of their daily role, and that's, the requirements, the expectation on their role has shifted. Has that been communicated? Is that clear? If you've got someone who's still doing the same thing they were doing last year and they're doing it well and they were a top performer, do you still consider them to be a top performer if their output is half of that of somebody who was previously a middling performer but is now using ChatGPT? How do you navigate these types of things to make sure you can correctly identify and retain and reward the top talent in your organization? And are you thinking ahead about, are we right sized? Which roles may be impacted? I think there's been numerous articles around, software development, content writing, market research, recruiting, customer support, all being very obvious choices where they're going to have quite a big impact from AI and automation coming along. So are you thinking about how to move those people and that knowledge those people built up into other areas of the organization? Or are you just going to kind of sit back and see, and then you end up needing to potentially make redundancies because, you don't necessarily need everybody doing the same thing. So thinking forward as well about, how are you going to assess talent in the hiring process? If people can be deep faked on video, you have 11 very convincing voice cloning, you can have ChatGPT write your work sample. How do you as a company verify who it is you're hiring and what their level of skill is? And does it matter if they pass the work sample? Does it matter if an AI did it or a person did it? Because they're clearly skilled at writing the right prompts to get the right results. So I think it's that kind of internal soul searching where you help a company actually go, what kind of company do we want to be, and do we aspire to be? Is it productivity at all costs? Is there something in our company values that mean we are going to use this in a particular way? But I think really internal communication around the changes coming from AI and helping companies to navigate that is so important, because it's such a topic.
No, it's a really interesting point about kind of the modern day recruiter and the performance based on that interaction with AI. And I guess the next question is, would that be in the kind of the must to haves or nice to haves when you're recommending to your portfolio companies a recruiter of whom needs that interaction with AI?
I'll jump in. I think it becomes a must have. AI is not going anywhere now. No one can put that back in the box. We all know it's there and what it can do. And so you're going to be behind your competitors if you're hiring recruiters that are not curious about this, if they don't have that growth mindset and they're not looking to learn and figure out how to use this to their advantage. You're going to fall behind your competitors.
Great. Polly, what about you? Anything to add there?
Plus one, of course, as I said, it's a boring conversation, but yes, because we are at an incredibly exciting pivot point. So if you're going to grow your function and think about the future, you need to be working with people who are embracing technology to scale what they do. That it is just a huge, but it's a huge. I can't stress how exciting I think that is for both talent and people leaders, because the only way I see this going is that it gets rid of all of the stuff that has undervalued the professions to this point in time, or a lot of the admin, a lot of the initial phase we should be working as hard as we can to automate that stuff and bring to the table the empathy, the analysis, the data, the insights into what we are doing as an organization that makes us better. So yes, it definitely would be on my spec for anyone who I was hiring. But I also feel that the whole audience here will be really excited about this too.
Yeah, no, it's super exciting. I agree, Polly. I'm using it a lot more now to do all the stuff that I hate, i.e. making pitch decks. Shout out to Gamma. I've been using them all the time. They were wonderful. And my OpenAI is just full of market maps now, best ed techs or health techs, and that's just crucial information that would have taken me a long hours before, and it's just there instantly. So yeah, super excited about it as well. Great, we'll move on to the next question. So can you describe what specific talent acquisition support your VC firm offers to its portfolios? Catherine, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so I mean, our support, I guess, starts right in the due diligence stage. So usually, myself or our North American talent partner will be involved in the due diligence before we even invest in a company. Do a bit of a talent audit and understand where are they at, what might they need forwards, and kind of how can we help. So, as soon as a company's joining our portfolio, we have a really clear picture of how we can best support them over the next, 6-12 months or so. I always have a little spiel that I'm not going to be a recruitment agency for them. I'm not going to just help them hire their next engineer. It really is about thinking bigger picture, a little bit more holistically about their people strategy, and not just tactically and reactively waiting for them to come to me and say, oh, we've really struggled to hire this software engineer in South Africa, can you recommend somebody? It really is thinking about, how do you design your leadership team? How are you building your culture? What does your hiring process look like? How are you making sure it's diverse? How are you building your employer brand? So looking at kind of programs of work, and thinking proactively to make sure that in the day-to-day, when they're putting out 20 fires, and it seems like building an employer brand is something that can wait and can be pushed back and pushed back, there is someone advocating for those things that will help them in the longer term, and say, no, it is worth just putting a little bit of focus and a bit of attention on this now, because it will pay off longer term. And the sooner you start to get some of these foundational pieces in place, you will make your life easier for kind of future you, and do yourself a favor. So we do have, so similar to Polly, we have a community where we try and connect across our portfolio companies or across industry leaders to make sure that they can learn from each other, and we don't become a bottleneck that needs to be the person distributing all the knowledge and learnings, but we can actually bring people together who have solved similar problems. Within that, I tend to vet particular vendors. We have this interesting position as an aggregator where we hear from portfolio companies when they've had a negative experience with an executive search firm, or they've had a really great experience with a new applicant tracking system that they're using. And so we can start to collate those data points to make recommendations to our portfolio. Actually, if you're looking for a new applicant tracking system, rather than spending weeks doing a market map and going around talking to them all, here's a pros and cons of our top 1, 2, 3 solutions in this space, and who might benefit from this type of software. And similarly connecting with the right executive search firms will consistently deliver results on hiring, or recruiters, RPOs. We do make introductions for certain roles, but I'm very conscious that sometimes an introduction from an investor can carry a certain weight to it, and we don't want to be interfering or kind of pushing companies in any direction. Ultimately, they need to live with that hire. They need to be comfortable that they've gone through their whole hiring process and they want to hire that person. So I'd say trying to be very considered, very sparing where we do make introductions we think can be mutually beneficial. We run our own jobs board, so for people who are looking for jobs in our portfolio companies, and we build a talent pool from that, and we can also match people where we think that there's some interesting conversations to be had. But I'd say really it's about, how do we connect our companies with the right resources, and not fall into the trap of doing things for them, but kind of helping them from people, or build the right connections to support them over the long term in a more sustainable way.
Makes sense. And I'm smiling because your point about kind of the credence that the profiles the investors give to the portfolios made me laugh, because I can't tell you how often this happens. We'll start to run an executive search, and we'll get a profile from an investor, and they'll try and just push them through halfway through to the process, and kind of then it's our jobs to be like, no, everybody needs the same equitable process. We have designed this process for it to be fair. But and I think the founders automatically think, okay, this is the profile, and often 9 times out of 10 it's nothing related, and they're not the right profile at all. So that made me smile. Over to you, Polly. Love to hear your thoughts on this question.
Cool. So I think that there's really two massive things going on at the moment. The first is, of course, AI, which was just touched on, and its impact on what we do. The second, however, is the shift in the investment landscape. So we are out of a growth period and into something which will inevitably be slower and more considered. that is why, as a focus, we've just launched our new talent toolkit. I think that what you're going to see, to a certain extent, and I appreciate that for many startups with great heads of talent the focus has always been on a hiring bar. But in the growth era, a lot of money has been in the ecosystem and been spent on talent. Probably with less due checks and measures and consideration and assessment than we really should have done. And I think what you're going to see is therefore much more emphasis on the assessment and the capabilities of individuals who join, because we need these people to join for longer term, right? We can't continue through a period, and investors are going to be concerned about high churn and therefore burn rate of teams that are not getting this hiring process right. So this is, I really believe, a critical area that we can support our portfolio companies. It's of course something that we have done kind of anecdotally and through consultancy, but what we have done for the past 6 to 8 months is we have been, we identified all of the key roles. So VPs from talent through to engineering, and various levels beneath that all of our portfolio companies hire because we invest at Series A. We interviewed great exemplars of those roles, and then from them defined archetypes. So I mentioned before, there's 2 or 3 probably for each role. We also interviewed people like you, so great recruiters who aren't just exemplars, but meet, thousands of those people every single time. So through all of that, we recognize that there's a principle of core 4. So whether we like it or don't, and most people don't like it, there are only 4 critical areas that are actually super important to every archetype. And all of this data analysis showed us that. So for every role that you hire, a core 4 areas of strength, behavior, and motivation that stack up together to make the person great at what they do. And so from those, we have built scorecards, which the core purpose of which is to expedite this hiring process, as we talked about before, to help founders have a data-driven and really strong starting point on which they can assess great candidates to ensure that we can get to the great next version of the CPO versus the current one, the person without the great brands, and we can assess those people really critically and be confident in making hires.
Yeah, no, I love your point about the scorecard, and I think a lot of founders forget to do that, and then obviously as recruiters it's our jobs to remind them of that. And then similarly building up this interview process to be very topic centric, rather than you're meeting with the CEO today or you're meeting with another person, but you're learning different things about it along the way. So that's really interesting. Okay, cool, we'll move on to the next question. So this one. So this is something that I have been dealing with a lot in the past few months, actually, and something that I was very curious about and interested in, and that's the rise of the fractional leadership. So I think probably relevant for both of you in the room working directly with the VCs. I'd love to hear your thoughts and comments on it. Is it here to stay? How are founders also taking this experience, and what are they thinking of the rise of the fractional leadership? So Polly, we'll start with you this time.
Yeah, I mean, I see it as a benefit from a candidate perspective in that you're going to be, really experienced individuals are taking more portfolio careers, and therefore, it's an obvious play to become a fractional leader versus an advisor or consultant, as it used to be called. But a huge benefit if you're going to get great talent. And we continually need to address our hiring tactics in order to attract those people if that's what we really need. Okay. Also, of course, from a cost perspective, there is, for example, we both advise and are finding that our portfolio companies are going much earlier with the finance lead. That is because those people play a critical role for your next raise. So whereas a Series A company did not used to hire a finance lead, they are now doing so. And that is a small talent pool. So those individuals who are now, wanting Stripe or whatever, wanting to be fractional CFOs are incredibly additive. Of course, longer term, you are because of the bandwidth, you are not going to get the amount of internal focus as you would with a permanent leader. That is, you know, a classic, again, a kind of iteration of your hiring strategy. And you start to feel, look, these roles are so key that you need them embedded. So, you know, I guess I was going to touch on this, but I guess my only other point here is, you know, I think it's a shame to me that through the recent round of layoffs, the usual suspects in people and talent have been laid off. And that feels so, as someone who's seen it happen before, it feels so noughties to me. I'm like, this is just what? So these weren't value add roles. Why has this happened? And so the idea that you now need to, and then people are panicking because they're seeing engagement scores drops, and we're living in a very, very uncertain time. And they, okay, I get a little bit of a fractional person here to upweight what I really shouldn't have got rid of in the first place. I think my view is that those roles, some of those roles, if they're core, and you're seeing the impact of that, and you don't bring those people back part-time to solve what should be in a future-facing business a critical role that you're not going to replace with AI. So that's, I guess, you know, that's my diatribe on.
Nice, thanks, Polly. Catherine, what about you?
Yeah, so I mean, I definitely see the benefits of people saying, you know, you can have more time for yourself, you can work remotely, you can have more time for family or work-life balance. You know, and as someone I think who, you know, I enjoy the portfolio aspect of my role. It's been one of the things that, you know, really energizes me, is you're working on one problem, and then when you get a bit stuck, you know, you always have something else to kind of turn your brain to, and you can come back to the other thing with a fresh perspective. You know, the ability to you know, test out something you've learned in multiple different scenarios, see how it plays out. You know, you can learn a lot from the breadth of being able to test your experience, and you can kind of cross-pollinate ideas as well. However, I think that is only if it is a genuinely fractional role, and that depends on the size, the stage that company is at. So yes, if you are a Series A company, maybe you don't need a full-time CFO, and a fractional leader can, you know, fill those needs. But, you know, to what Polly said, I think quite often companies will reach a size or a point where they need someone who actually, from a signaling perspective as well to the company, is there as a leader. They are committed, invested, and, you know, they're very visible to the company, and it feels like there's a complete leadership team, not just, you know, 5 people who give 10% of their time here and there, and, you know, they're there as advisors to the CEO, but they're not there for the company and for the employees. If those leaders need to build out teams, you can't have teams that don't have someone who is there as a people manager, invest in their professional development. So you know, if you have a single role function, which sometimes can be finance, occasionally can be people, depending on size and stage, you know, then it works to have a fractional role. But the point at which you have a team, the point at which you have problems that mean you're calling somebody on weekends, and actually you're not respecting that balance because you're trying to get them to do a full-time job, you know, 50% or 20% time, then, you know, I think a bit of a reality check is needed. So yes, I would love it to be a long-term trend, but I think it requires serious boundary setting. And it only works, I think, for certain size and stage, and depending on, you know, your
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's an earlier stage situation, isn't it? Particularly, as you said, Polly, you know, with the CFO or CTOs. And I think I can't, you know, count the number of leaders that kind of approach me every day now and say, hey, do you have any interim or fractional work going? And I think it's interesting for a lot of these people with around 20 years experience, you know, because they've seen it all. They've worked with multiple teams. They've seen every kind of challenge under the sun, and they genuinely want to go into those companies and solve those challenges. And conversely, it's very interesting for a client who says, you know, Georgia, we want to kick off a CTO role, but we, you know, estimate maybe it will take kind of 6 months. So a fractional CTO might be a really good way to actually put out the, you know, the fires that are happening now, and then also help us shape the profile even further. So I think, as you said, Catherine, there's a time and place for it, isn't there?
I think what may come to pass though is looking how sustainable this is. So if it's only suitable for a certain time and place, dealing with problems, how many times could you do that as a fractional leader, repeating the same thing, saying again and again and again, but not doing the next part of the journey because maybe that requires someone who's a little bit more invested? Are you still going to be as engaged, the seventh or eighth time when you're seeing that? If you're a, I don't know, CRO or a sales leader, seeing that first push to build your go-to-market motion, and you know the playbook for go-to-market motion when you've just found your product market fit, those steps are going to be the same. How often can you repeat that and still find it exciting? I think really people could be using fractional leadership as a mentor to upskill someone who's almost there in their existing team, as an internal coach, to build up that next level of leadership for someone who is in the company, will be there full time and wants the permanent role.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, they're a coach first and foremost as well. So totally agree with this point. Okay, 10 minutes left. So I'd love us to go into the Q&A that our lovely audience have asked us. So to start off with the kind of the most upvoted question. I see attendance of startups to be quite rigid on former experience of the managers they're looking for. Aren't we killing creativity and limiting opportunities? Holly?
Well, yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think all the stuff that I was talking about in terms of identifying potential versus kind of, big brands on a CV is exactly where I'm coming from. I think, for us, we use a platform that supports all these scorecards, which enables us to look at core strengths and capabilities, but also motivations. And this area of motivation, Catherine just pointed to it, is somebody willing and ready to go this incredibly intense journey again? Because I think that's probably been the question of my professional career, is like, what make somebody brilliant within a really changing, totally confusing, fast-paced environment? And that's motivation, actually. So to your point, I think, to the question, yes, we're being limited. And that's because as human beings, we're not great at assessing this area of motivation, because that's where our own personal bias kicks in. So I think that for us in talent assessment, in looking at it, is something we really try to help our founding teams with, but it's also a really exciting place to unlock miles more potential and bring new people into this ecosystem.
Great. Thanks, Polly. Catherine?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was slightly on my soapbox earlier on this point of, people who feel like just copying what another company has done or just hiring someone who has that name, is innovation and they're going to be an innovative company. I think really it's about understanding who you are as a company, what sets you apart, what you need, and who will succeed in your environment. No company is a great match for everybody. I think this always comes back to one of the things I tell a lot of hiring teams in our portfolio companies. When you're writing those job descriptions, you're not trying to appeal to everybody. You don't want to screen 1,000 applications coming in. There is a certain type of person who will succeed, who will love working in this company, and you need to figure out what that is. And that shouldn't be based on characteristics. When you look at the team you have, it's not about replicating what you have. There can be people who are there for diverse reasons or have diverse backgrounds, but there is, to Polly's point, a motivation, or there is a potential that is shared by these people that makes them all brilliant for the challenge that you are facing and for the strategy that you are going after. And that can shift and it can change over time for a company, but I think it really requires a lot of introspection, which is hard. And so people take the easy route of saying, we'll just, hire someone who's got this name on their CV.
Yeah, makes sense. And I think, on the candidate side of things, like you just said, for the client, have your list of non-negotiables. When you're entering the job search, you have to have the things that you must see in a company, and the things that you can wax and wane on slightly as well. Would be my advice. Next question we have is from Mary, is how do you work with companies to help them avoid bias in hiring and ensuring diversity in the companies? So Catherine, we'll start with you this time.
So I think sometimes it can just be having a hard conversation. I think, there are softer things you can do, and those nudges, where someone's asking for feedback on a job description and you can kind of get pointers. But I think sometimes, and I've had this thankfully only once so far, actually looking at a company and looking at some of the proposed hires, you have to take a more, I don't want to say forceful, but a much more deliberate intervention to hold up as someone outside the company and say, actually, if you look at your existing team, they all share X quality. And I can see this as someone outside. I've done a LinkedIn search for, let's say this company name, and 80% of your company have worked at this company with this company name. Why do you think that is? Is that the kind of organization you want to build? Let's unpack that. And it really is a coaching conversation to understand, in this case, that CEO, I think, attributed to certain characteristics. They personally had familiarity with that company, and so they attributed, because they understood the training or the development that company went through and invested in its employees, they saw it as a shortcut to getting certain skills or getting certain experience. And so it really becomes a coaching conversation to explore, what are the other options for getting those skills? What confidence do you have in your ability in the interview process to actually test for that, and not just rely on, well, if they've worked at this company, it might have worked. So I think it's about being sometimes that difficult voice in the room and that thorn in their side that is willing to hold up a mirror when maybe internally people around a leadership team don't do that, and to flag the breadth of what diversity actually means. It's not just, some our companies will report on things like gender pay gaps and ethnicity, but actually, some of the things I personally get quite passionate about, things like visible and non-visible disabilities and neurodiversity and socioeconomic background and opportunities that people have had. And so when you start to actually ask the questions of the teams to say, okay, tell me about the design of your hiring process. How have you thought about this from an accessibility perspective for someone who is neurodiverse? Have you made these small accommodations, and being able to connect them with people from those communities to actually use a test some of their hiring experiences and give them feedback on how that experience feels for somebody from those communities. And again, it kind of comes back to where we started the conversation, the power of the VC network, that in most cases you can connect one of your portfolio companies with someone who shares particular characteristics, whichever ones might be looking for. But I think fundamentally it is just sometimes being slightly outside of the room, you can provide a counterpoint when maybe they get wrapped up and don't see some of these things unfolding.
Absolutely. Polly, anything to add there?
Yeah, I mean, I just have a strong belief that that DE&I needs to be baked in, and so our internal consultancy offering enables us to offer 2 toolkits to our portfolio companies that an early stage company otherwise can't, struggles to implement. So we put in place a compensation toolkit which gives transparent pay and career leveling, and a career framework. And those are the 2 core questions that anyone who is less represented really needs to feel like psychological safety around. I feel I'm being paid. I know that I'm being paid fairly relative to other individuals, and I also have a clear and objective way to get on within this organization. And quite often the reasons why, if you hire for diversity, people arrive in your organization and then feel that it's not fair. So we do those 2 things with our portfolio companies first, but then of course the talent toolkits are all about objective hiring, right? So those scorecards, which have so much process and structure behind them, are about making us agnostic to a lot of the issues that then get in the way of hiring diverse talent, and supporting our recruitment partners like you, who are having these conversations about great candidate experience and strong process.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. I mean, I can't count the amount of times female leaders particularly will come and say, Georgia, how much should I be asking for? And the gap is so disparate. I'm still, in 2023, like very, very shocked how disparate it is. So yeah, these tools and these frameworks are really, really important to provide the portfolio companies. We're at time now, so thank you both so much for offering your time today. It was really, really interesting to hear your insights. Definitely connect and catch up after this. And thank you to our audience for engaging and asking loads of questions. If you would like to learn anything more about Accelerate, please feel free to message myself, Isabel, or anyone from the company, and we will help you. I wish you all an amazing day. Thank you so much. Ciao.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye bye.